Greetings, students, and welcome to week 9. This week we're talking about facility. We're talking about facility in terms of your physical space and the story it tells to your users. We'll be looking at several themes, and we'll be exploring them in this lecture briefly, but also on your playlist, in your own explorations and images that you discover relating to space and environment. So I'm hoping this week will be a lot of fun. I always enjoy it. We are not alone, of course, in thinking about space as it relates to learning. John Dewey famously noted, whether we permit chance environments to do the work or whether we design environments for the purpose makes a great difference. Your space matters in terms of the message it sends to learners, in terms of the invitation it presents to learn. I want you to think this week about what the story is that your space tells. I want you to think about design. Early in the semester, we touched on this a little bit, but this week, I want you to really look around in your field experience, your own library, and also on a kind of safari. A lot of people have been thinking about libraries and these spaces that are special to people. Some people think of libraries as third places in the that fit with the thinking of Ray Oldenburg. Third places, according to the urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg, are important. They are public gathering places where people congregate. They are places other than work and home, and they share some common features that I think are mostly common to school libraries as well. They're neutral. All people are welcome to come when they want to come. They're level. Your status doesn't matter as much as your status matters in some other places. Conversation is a prominent activity. I should hope that that is the case in your library. The space or the place is accessible. There's a regular clientele that you kind of look forward to when you visit. The space, the place is unpretentious. There's a playful mood. And these places contribute to our lives. They offer us identity. They allow us to be us. Other folks have talked about learning spaces, very often mentioning people like Dewey and people like Oldenburg. Most notably, Diana Oblinger wrote a much quoted book, which is really an anthology. It's called Learning Places. She contends that we are learning to put pedagogy first. Ask what learning activities will lead to the desired outcomes, not which projection system to install. Many of those effective learning tech activities are experiential and collective, very similar to what Dewey was saying. And so what we're seeing is that classroom designs are moving away from a focus on the front of the room and the instructor. And in some cases, students sit closer to the instructor or at small tables, such as star clusters or circular tables. Small group conversations are encouraged, which inspire learning. And so Oblinger suggests that these emerging patterns that we're seeing in classrooms, which really apply to libraries as well, are about creating multiple focal points in classrooms, not just a single one, establishing grouping and clustering students rather than seating them in rows, establishing informal group workspaces, providing movable furniture, and building reconfigurable spaces. You're going to be seeing a webinar, and one of the themes of the webinar that really kind of pulls on future-ready librarians and the framework asks the questions or suggests that it's going to present how librarians can design, support, and champion collaborative and flexible spaces that promote inquiry, creativity, collaboration, and community. It's important to note that the Future Ready Librarians framework does focus on the use of space and time, and this is meant to align with the Future Ready Schools movement. And again, on that wedge, you see the same thought that I just mentioned about designing collaborative spaces. So when you're thinking about what you're doing with your space, and your school might be a Future Ready school, have that conversation and think with your administrators or whoever's on that planning team about how that library contributes to the learning environment in terms of its space. Personally, I think that libraries ought to be places of enchantment, that you ought to consider what is that first impression. There is a big relationship between your space and your library program. When I opened my library doors in the morning, I had this feeling of, I'm home. And you want your students, your faculty, all your users to open that door and feel a sense of comfort and perhaps a sense of enchantment, that playful feeling or atmosphere that Oldenburg mentioned. When we think about enchantment, I think of a book written not too long ago by Guy Kawasaki, who defined enchantment as the process of delighting people with a product, service, organization, or idea. The outcome of enchantment is voluntary and long-lasting support that is mutually beneficial. Consider what you might do to create a more enchanting space. Among the things I think about is the space welcoming? Does it invite multiple activities? How does it work for the types of class and student visits? Is the furniture and shelving appropriate for the age of your learners and their learning styles? Is it flexible and adaptable? Does it celebrate the students and their work? Similar to the notion that there's a third place, there was a book by Loris Malaguzzi called The Third Teacher. And the goal of the book was to show that the design of school is intrinsically linked to the learning. Teaching and learning should shape the building, not vice versa. Very important to keep in mind, especially when you work with architects. You'll read the name David Thornburg and Diana Rendina's book this week. She'll be referring to these metaphors that Thornburg imagined. So Thornburg, who is a futurist and an educational consultant, maintains that in order to engage all students, learning institutions should offer a balance of the following. And as I say these things, I want you to think about what these things look like or might look like in a library. Campfire spaces, that's home of the lecture, possibly also places for storytelling and presentation. Watering holes, homes to conversation between or among peers. Caves, places for quiet reflection. What types of cozy spaces like that might you imagine? And life, places where students can apply what they've learned. And you'll have a link to the book here. So I'd like for you to take a look at that and imagine what these metaphors might look like in your library, and also imagine what other metaphors you might come up with. For instance, if I've spoken to you about this a little bit, I've thought about my library as a kind of salon, a la Gertrude Stein, where the poets and the authors and the artists come in, and I'm able to greet them and serve them some snacks, and engage people in these conversations, and ways they might do all the things that are listed here that by Thornburg. In any case, think about these metaphors and think about additional metaphors. As you think about those out-of-the-box metaphors, look outside the library. You will find all sorts of environments that will inspire you. For instance, you're seeing all these co-working spaces that are flexible, they are multi-use, they foster collaboration, and people feel like communities as they enter them. You're seeing the maker culture movement and a focus on hands-on learning. That's part of what could be part of your library. We're seeing our learning being student-centered, and we're focusing on student well-being. Think about how you might design spaces that fit in with movements like this as you observe your students, and think about really, and most important is what their needs are. For many of our students, This will be an interesting type of environment. The Danish hygge idea. A student shared this with me a couple of years back. It's the Danish art of building sanctuary and community through coziness and the shared experiences. By adopting these principles, school libraries can transform into warm, tech-free havens that reduce student stress and foster social connection. And you can achieve that idea of hygge by creating cozy nooks. This reminds us of Thornburg, of course. You can come up with tech-free strategies where kids are sitting and having conversations and perhaps putting puzzles together and collaborating on low-tech ideas. You can even create a home hygge kits or hygge kits and create atmospheres. Use your lighting, use other strategies for creating that warm and cozy environment. Outside of the library, I've always thought of other spaces that include hospitality. Will Guidara's recent book, Unreasonable Hospitality, really inspired me. It's subtitled The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. If you get a chance, watch Guidara's TED Talk or just read the book. Some of his quotes just blow me away. No aspect of your business should be off limits to reevaluation. Nothing is sacred. What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? His mission in his restaurants, 11 Park, and he was involved with Shake Shack too, to prove that creative and intentional hospitality is transformative. He's got so many stories, and there's no reason why a restaurant environment cannot inspire a library hospitality environment. So, what we're thinking about this week is reinventing space. And you may not have an opportunity to completely redesign, but you can always make small changes. And the small tweaks that you make early on can make a big difference. The first thing you can do is just look around. Is your space welcoming? Does it invite multiple types of activity? Does it work for the types of regular class and student visits that you are observing? Is the furniture and the shelving appropriate for the age and the learning styles of your students and the teachers who serve them? Can you adapt and make your space flexible? Can you move the tables around for a PTA meeting or for group work? Does it celebrate students and student work? Is student work displayed? That's a really important mark of student ownership of the space. One of the readings you're going to be doing this week is Hannah Bird Little's work, A Sense of Place, which I think is a beautiful way to think about your library. She identifies 7 essential zones of impact, having to do with inspiration and comfort, collaboration and creation, expression and community. All these things are foundations of a thriving library, with a librarian as linchpin, the library serving as a vital third space, considering literacy beyond screens, celebrating collaboration and creation. I hope you enjoy the readings this week. Among the things you'll think about as you look around is the signs that you post. Are they welcoming? Do they invite? Do they say, in this library, you can rather than don't? You start at your front door. This front door on the top here has library rules and all the no's and the don'ts and all those negative words, instead of words like welcome, come here and explore, create, and read. Wayfinding tools like friendly signage that allows you to discover where you need to be, and that goes to your signs for genre and Dewey numbers as well. Ideas of like what you can do in a space, like a collaboration zone. We had something we called the Creative Commons in the high school library I worked at, where all the designer software and studio tables were. It was just the students knew that this was a place that they could go to create. In addition to your signage, you can do things like passive programming. You'll have some of these things in your readings actually throughout the semester. But think about the low or no schedule activities and experiences that students can engage in on their own times as they drop in without sign-ups or set hours or even staff facilitation. These can be available before and after school as well as during school, especially for kiddos that have study hall in the secondary level. They don't require any of your time, and they're really kind of fun for informal engagement. So, what might passive programming look like? You can have interactive displays. They could be contests or challenges. You can have corners. We talked a little bit about creation corners informally. Some folks like coloring or craft tables, bookmark design, informal book reviews that students can post, put in books or create with sticky notes. These help to reach students who are not in all those formal activities like the clubs and the teams. They can support literacy and SEL, and they are just without any constraints or really serious rules. And these are just a few other examples of types of passive programming, puzzles and games and SEL kinds of activities and things that include student voice. For instance, at the end of the semester, our seniors would post where they were going to college or what their favorite activity at the high school was. And these were really just kind of low investment interactive boards that we would do. And I'll show you examples of the students creating art for the library on their own, as well as a type of passive programming. Another little list of ideas: guess the number of marbles. You can use kind of creative mosaic projects, scavenger hunts, and kinds of crafts, and generally unplugged zones for puzzles and maybe quiet games. So I feel free to browse through these. Passive program is one idea for how you might use your space in creative and informal ways. Another way that you can use your space is move beyond traditional shelving approaches to dynamic shelving. And there'll be readings this week in our playlist on this too. Dynamic shelving is flexible, user-centered shelving that organizes books by user patterns, interests, and themes rather than leaving everything fixed and in one Dewey or alphabetical sequence. And you can see this is a little bit like genrefying, but it's also about the physical arrangement of the books. You have lots of face-out books, rotating displays, and curated groupings that are updated frequently. These things can help in a number of ways. They certainly engage the students who come in and the teachers who come in, but they can also result in increased circulation. They support readers' choice, and they create a culture of browsing rather than finding at a point of need. So this whole notion of discovery rather than just finding a book because it's assigned. Here's, I hope you take a little time to read this, but these are just examples of how you can engage your traditional collection with dynamic shelving practices. And a little bit more in terms of what the value is. So please take some time to read this in some detail. So there are little things that we can do to make our space more friendly, engaging, active, and student-owned. But some of us actually get an opportunity to work with architects. If we do, we need to make sure that the architects don't have free rein and that our voices are heard in terms of what's really important. It's important that every decision must be learner-centric. How will the changes that we make in our space support learning science, and effective pedagogy? How will it support focus and attention? How will it allow for purposeful movement? How will it reduce stress and cognitive load? And so your work with your architects, you may not immediately be invited in. This is a table you want to find a space at. You want your architects to hear you. You want a partnership. You want to bring some ideas in that they may not have heard. I've been involved in three design projects, formal design projects. In the first one, the architects put a skylight over our meeting room where we showed films. And I had to get our custodian to climb up the roof of that particular space and throw towels over the skylight so we could actually show films. I would have at this point installed some kind of automatic system, but that worked for what we were doing. In any case, what the design should do is to solve learning problems and to also create beauty and enchantment, as we described before. When you have a project, I hope that the admins will help you form, or they will form a steering committee, that you'll think about not just what's happening today, but the trends in libraries, and you'll design for tomorrow. I hope, like me, I kept mood boards of patterns, and when we had to choose furniture, fabrics, carpeting, what worked, what didn't work. I needed to learn to read blueprints. In fact, there were words I didn't know, vocabulary I didn't know, like the word soffit was not common to me, but I learned an awful lot. But you should be able to look at the plans and make comments on them. You should be considering usage patterns, possible blind spots, the need for storage, the importance of acoustics and lighting, and the aesthetics, as we talked about just a second ago, colors, textures, the importance of having enough power for the many pieces of equipment you're going to be charging, and student equipment in one-on-one environments. And you should make sure that your voice gets heard, that it is, yes, the artistic statement is important, but it's not just about the artistic statements. And again, how do the decisions support learning and the school and library mission? You can think about these as commitments as you're making decisions. Robert Dillon is a friend and colleague who's written 3 ways the learning space industry can actually help schools. He works with architects. He has a blog on Substack, and it's something I check fairly regularly, and he has his finger on library design. You can also check Knowledge Quest blog for ideas. This is their category of blog posts on design and create. I also am going to be introducing you to Diana Rendina, who is a kind of practitioner expert on library space, both on a big and small level. And in this blog post, in her Designing Learning, she talks about some small efforts that make a big difference if you're dealing with a budget. And these are just some of, you can hit Pinterest for some of these. You can see that Diana's posts are front and center when I do a search for boards that have to do with library design, but there are many other people. I use Pinterest when I am thinking about design a lot. As you make the plans, just like we were thinking about with David Thornburg's zones, these are the types of activities that typically happen in the library. And when you're talking to an architect, these are the sorts of things that I would be looking for in library design. This is going to shift as time changes, but it's just a basic list to consider. You also need to think not just about the types of activities, but your users' needs. You need to think about accessibility for all users, especially users who have challenges in terms of their physical access. You may need water, you may need a bathroom, you may need space to process. That's kind of your space, and is that supported? How does lighting impact use? Noise issues, how will you mitigate it if you're right over a cafeteria? How might your library be more green and sustainable? What about access to the rest of the building? Is your storage adequate? Don't lose those storage spaces. People are going to want to take them from you. And how is the library connected to outside spaces that you might use for a garden or read alouds? But also, how is it connected to the rest of the building? How easy is access? And then some people have more than one floor, and how challenging is it to manage a kind of area, mezzanine area? In many cases, you don't want that kind of thing. Thinking about acoustics and flooring and carpeting and walls are something you might want to concern yourself with, and things, if you can get in at the beginning of a project, you can ask an architect about. In general, whether you have an architect or not, how do your users think about your space? Is that environment kid-friendly? You can do things like taking pictures of your space from a number of angles. How do the kids watch the kids, how they actually use the space, ask for feedback and suggestions, create a little design committee, rearrange things that don't seem to work. If the tables aren't working or if a book display isn't working, just because it's been in that space for 20 years doesn't mean it should stay there. If you love flowers, bring flowers in. Have the kids engage in helping you with displays and bulletin boards. Take read posters, make your own. You don't have to only buy them from ALA. And use your art teachers and any student artist to help you make sure that ownership is there of the students. Instead of making Dewey signs, I had the sculpture class create representations of our Dewey areas using three-dimensional materials. All of this stuff is possible. Here is an experiment I did. I may not show the whole thing. I sent my students around with cameras because I wanted to know, I know how I reacted to my space. I wanted to know what spaces they themselves felt that they owned and which were important to them. So I just gave them cameras. They would have their cell phones right now, and they'd be able to go around and do this themselves. But here's some of what they said.
It's our library, and this is a place where I've spent countless hours working on.
Notice the student art as Mary's working.
Lots of research, and I've learned a lot through both the online databases and the resources we have here in school. Here's a section I spent a lot of time in, especially in my junior year during AP US History. I love all these books. I love these ones in particular, the opposing viewpoints. You get some really great articles, and you can contrast them with a lot of other articles. We also have the Annals of American History. Those have been a tremendous help.
Kyle.
We're going to begin our tour back here. This is what is known as the instructional area, and I get the vast majority of my work done at these tables. It's incredibly quiet, very peaceful, and it's perfect for just sitting down, using the computers if you need to. We got one back there, really great machine, and just working on your chemistry or working on your physics or whatever you got going. Over here is the quiet area.
I did want to point out that many libraries are moving in the direction of at least having a partial area or a portable area that encourages making. On the Knowledge Quest blog, you will see an awful lot of writing about makerspaces from really large-scale makerspace ideas to makerspaces that are in tubs and can be brought out or even circulated. So think about whether or not your library needs a makerspace, whether that kind of creative expression, that tinkering is happening anywhere else in your school, and think about whether or not you need to fill that gap for invention, for creation, for design thinking among your students. I think that we're seeing a lot of focused making going on. And I'm really inspired by Gina Seymour, who has her students look for important things to make, addressing needs in her community. And so she has this notion of maker care. And she argues that students need to be compassionate makers. I encourage you to read some of Gina's work. She's not the only one involved in a maker care movement. Um, I wrote a blog post on perhaps taking a little break or easing the brakes because I was worried that folks were going into the makerspace movement without real purpose and just buying things randomly and not really planning for why they needed to make. And in fact, my school, there was so much making going on because we had a National Science Foundation scholar who was on the other side of the building in this huge space, and making was happening not only in her classroom, but in this huge area we called the Airport Lounge all day long. And there were festivals relating to all the things that our students made. And so for me, the making became the need was a gap in terms of the arts and performance, which was also celebrated in our library, but it wasn't, some of the materials weren't accessible during the full school day because the art teachers were busy. And so we supported the students' needs in every area of making, but I didn't need to have a formal makerspace. What I had was a Creative Commons, which was what our school really needed. In the post that I wrote the reasons why library spaces are changing and the thinking that we needed to do about maker spaces, about participative culture, the Learning Commons movement, the fact that learning is more portable and we're moving from desktops to mobile, and that is absolutely changing our spaces in terms of the need for fewer labs. That our collections are becoming more digital and print is becoming less of a focus, and just where are we going in terms of active learning? So I hope you'll take a look at that. Also regarding learning, these are some of the posts that you'll find on Diana Rendina's Renovated Learning blog. Excellent work, and she shares so much, and she also has a few books on the topic. As we learned about these flexible spaces and collaborative spaces, be on the lookout for furniture that moves around and that locks together and fits together. Be on the lookout for cozy furniture that allows us to write. You see those dividers are also whiteboards and they can be moved around. Allowing students to move furniture together. Casters are very important. In fact, I had our custodians put casters on some of our tables and chairs so that they could be more easily moved. They were too heavy. Where are your books? Are they in the way of collaboration? Not necessarily should you get rid of them, but maybe you need some different configurations. I'm just showing how some of my students work. Note that they're always moving around the library. They're collaborating. They're bringing their laptops everywhere, including my office, where there were often meetings and consultations. In this little collage, you're seeing two boys who hated the cafeteria, who preferred to eat in the library office. You're seeing yearbook day, where the students at the end of the year, instead of going to the cafeteria, brought all the yearbooks for signing to the library. One of my very favorite times of the year. You're seeing our unplugged events that sometimes we had on Friday nights. You're seeing quiet reading. You're seeing movie production. And you're seeing at the top right one of my favorite art teachers who used the library as a gallery and asked the students, when they brought their pieces of work in, to present an artist statement and to engage in art critique, and to also find a place for installation in the library. So lots of things were going on there. This is Shannon Miller's School Library Journal article about how she worked with the architect to really rethink her library, and also her vision of how kids are working. Notice they're plopped on the floor with the laptops. There are tables all over the place not being used. They are forming small groups on the floor. They're presenting, working with experts. What does this say to you about the way you might design a library? This is the way the kids are actually working. Some more pictures of my library where we had 1920s and 30s days where the students were the teachers and dressed up and danced, and we got all sorts of classes to visit where the students are actually working on projects for their art classes. And that's fine, where they're using light in different ways to trace and do things, where they're engaged in air guitar, and people are paying attention to that, others are not. And sometimes they're just getting cozy. And we actually bought cozier chairs because I looked at pictures like this and saw, there probably are better ways for our students to feel comfortable. And there are some students who really nest in libraries, and I know there are libraries that discourage people from sitting on the floor. I also want you to notice some of the art installations that you'll see around this library, and notice how kids are really comfortable. They would open these boxes of books and then disappear. I didn't know where they'd wind up, but when the new John Green came out, they'd run on the floor and be just like spending study halls, going crazy. And also, some of the students engaged in moments of tutoring. Here are two ESL students who were helping each other. I had students who made it informally their business to be available during their study hours, study halls, to come to the library and tutor other students in math or physics, or help critique essays or college essays with me. This is another event where we had a gallery opening. This we did on a regular basis, and we often invited student musicians to be part of the show. Do you need a circulation desk? A lot of people would argue not. A lot of people would argue you don't need the massive circulation desks that we used to see. I put these two pictures in there because I wanted to show you some of the action that would happen. There were always student volunteers behind the circ desk. They loved that privilege. They loved sitting on that blue chair. And often I had conversations in the morning. Some of our reps from EBSCO and Gale and ProQuest, for instance, visited often early in the morning and had conversations with me. This is Jim Ellis from ProQuest. Our EBSCO rep was actually a parent in the district and would come and join me at 7 in the morning to watch the way students worked early. And they were a part of our community and always welcome. We're talking about how offices might change too. I mentioned how my students would come to my office for consultations on their projects, and they felt that was very special. I did exit interviews and things there. And I often gave the office to students who needed to interact with experts or have small group meetings that really were private. And so the office became a kind of a sign-up area, and I did not sit in my office 24/7 for sure. And so it was used for special purposes, and it was used often. You'll need to make decisions about whether or not you need a security system. These are quite common, especially in high schools. Even really sweet students you'll find walking out with books accidentally. These are sensitive to signals that you need to break the circuit in them. Sometimes you do that electronically. Sometimes you put a card in to break it. You install the system, and you also install targets in your books, and among the costs you would have to spend are the maintenance of the system. Sometimes that can be something that's taken by central office, and occasionally buying more targets and the special cards that you need. So think about that. It really may be worth it if you are not going to lose much of your collection. And also if you need to make the case, look at your inventory at the end of the year to see how many books are lost and in what areas, and that will give you some evidence for the return on investment that would be possible with the system. You need to be concerned about physical safety. You don't want any freestanding shelves that could fall over or be pushed over. You may need to also make sure that the shelves on those bookshelves are stable. Sometimes bookshelves are on pins, and those pins can get screwed loose, and bookshelves can fall down on themselves or on unsuspecting kids who are browsing. You want to check your carpeting for rips that kids could trip over, or cables that are on the floor can be tripped. You need to pay attention to power standards. In some areas that are prone to storms, you might need an electrical backup system, a generator. You don't want to lose and you need to back up your records. You don't want to. I hope that you have some kind of automatic system for this. You don't want to lose all the checkouts you've done since the last backup, or all the new titles that have been added. So you want to think about that. In some areas that are prone to flooding and other things, think about emergency contingency plans have a fairly recent list of printed out that lists your holdings in case there's a problem and you have an insurance claim. And relating to safety, of course, make sure that your library feels like a safe space or a haven. A topic I brought up in the discussion this week that I want you to think about in these times is, do you have a plan in place for safety in case of a different type of emergency, like an active shooter? Can you lock your doors? Have you tested that? Does your school have emergency codes? We had codes for a lot of different things that we had on cards that we put on our bulletin board so we knew exactly what the codes meant. Does the loudspeaker work in the library so if an announcement's being made, can you easily hear it? Will you know where to hide students or visiting classes? You could have 100 or 200 kids in the library, in a larger library. How will you manage where to hide them if you have to? Do you know where the exit routes are? Where do you escape from? Do you know which spots in your library are visible and invisible from somebody who's peeking in the door? Is there a way you can close a shade to the library, or do you have all glass like I did? Do authorities have a map of your facility, or that's part of the blueprint probably that your administrators should give to the police and firefighters? I probably mentioned this in the discussion, but I myself, back in 2006, was a victim of an active shooter situation. I wasn't hurt, but I don't think any of us who were there that day will ever forget that the halls were being shot up and that a young man killed himself right outside my glass doors. What I had to do was put paper up so the children wouldn't see the body. And what I found myself and all the very brave colleagues I worked with, when we had the alert, when we had the code, we were grabbing students in the hall. It happened during transition time, and grabbing them and bringing them into the classroom and very nervously locking our doors. It can happen to you, so you need to have a plan. Shifting gears, make sure you are friends with the custodians, the maintenance people, the skilled workers in your district. I had talented carpenters in the maintenance department who were eager to help me because the library was such a pleasant place to be. We always had food around. They will also make sure that your library is clean, that that they will promptly take care of a pest situation. Which brings me to the idea that you need to think about whether you want food and coffee in your library, and if so, do you want it in certain areas? Or, if you do have that, you're likely going to be doing some of the cleanup. You will hope the students will do it on their own, and you'll encourage that. But keep thinking about, what the rewards versus problems relating to that might be. Do you have issues with graffiti, and how will you address them? We did have an issue, although the kids took great care of our library. At the end of a semester, I turned the tables over, and the bottom was a collage of gum. Didn't know how to prevent that. How are you going to arrange the library? As I mentioned before, the New York City's public schools libraries LibGuide has a wealth of information. And in this case, here is an example of some material on layout that you may want to look at and the things that you might want to plan. And they have great advice. Let's shift gears again to signage. Again, for signage, you can get beautiful inspiration from both Pinterest and Instagram and lots of other sites as well. No cell phones, no texting, no personal computers or other equipment, no talking, no eating or drinking, no book checkout without ID. A library is for schoolwork only. As opposed to this other type of signage, which says, please use your phone quietly. If you need help connecting to the network, let us know. Hard time finding something online, we can help you search. We have social learning areas. You get the idea. And it's a much friendlier sign. It responds to the notion that to the students that this is their space. This is their third place. Involve the students in making the signs. Our read signs were really popular, and each year we invited the clubs to take over, share their favorite books, use green screen, find the backgrounds, and really great fun. And also, in many classes, when they were reading a book, we often made advertisements for the book that actually were based on knowledge, and they had to defend them. A lot of production going on. Sorry, I hid that young lady's face, but we had a whole bunch of Spartan dolls that were often doing tutorials for us. And this one was, I don't even remember, but here is the Spartan army entering the library. And the students were always making promotional videos for us. And so sometimes they had hot dog and Spartan costumes and lion costumes. One thing that we had with a lot of glass in our library, may not be your library, was washable markers, and the students fought over, and we had two art teachers who would help us with this, but they fought over who was going to create the front mural, and they had to present a pitch for me about what their design looked like. And once that was approved, and I had some students help me with deciding, some of our special volunteers, then they could go ahead with their plan. And this was just so popular. And one of the deals was they had to clean up the previous mural before putting it up. So I never really had to do that work. Our display cases were often interactive. Sometimes I'd put up QR codes for the apps that I'd recommend, and they could just take their phone and download them, or for special library content. So often my displays involved QR codes. But here at the end of the school year, I invited the seniors to put up a card, each one of them, and my volunteers organized this into groupings about where they were going. Another thing I did was with the seniors, I'd say, what was the most memorable experience you had? And that was that Thanks for the Memories board, which was really interesting evidence on what they felt was the most powerful learning experience or the most powerful memory. It was never solving for X. It was never learning grammar. It was always a special event, often in the library, participating in a show, going on a field trip, some knowledge learning that happened in the field. This was really strong evidence for me. I take photographs, as you could see, and put them up on our Flickr boards, and this became really an important part of my annual report. Of course, you're going to pay attention to Access Americans with Disabilities Acts, mandates, and guidelines. Very, very important to make sure your library is physically as well as intellectually accessible. Here you can see a student who was fine reaching the desk, but I was watching for him for a lot of the issues that he faced. We did have guidelines when we renovated the library, but there were things I didn't notice that I wanted to make sure were clear for him. On our LibGuide, you'll see a page devoted to vendors, some of the vendors that you should know about that regularly provide us with options for furniture as well as inspiration are these. There are vendors outside of the library world that you can look at. And please be aware that your district may have a list of district-approved vendors and state purchase agreements, and those would be preferred, and those you will have less trouble ordering through. It's very possible that your district has already approved Demco, Brodart, the library store, and MAC and the others as approved vendors, but you will need to know that. We'll talk about purchase orders and other such things at a later time. Need to think about is the line of vision. One of the things I didn't really pay as close attention to as I should was that the architects created a library with me that I couldn't see all the spaces in. So that was in the initial blueprint. We wound up creating the shelves in a spiked kind of wheel kind of arrangement, so I could better see what was going on in the far end of the library. Another thing I did was in areas I couldn't see, I put up large mirrors similar to the mirrors that are put up when driveways are not really accessible to the traffic that's coming down the road. And so I found those were useful in managing the space from the front desk. You'll find some planning tools in Wills and Koch. You'll also find some resources listed on assignment 2 that will help you create before and after floor plans for your strategic plan. I hope that you find this activity a bit fun and an opportunity to imagine what's possible. This is an example of a small project that I was happy to be involved in, that I mentioned before, called our Creative Commons Space. So we had a traditional reference area which wasn't really being utilized to the fullest possible extent. And we came up with a plan that allowed us to continue to have a reference section, albeit weeded a bit, and also to create a place for the kind of making that we really needed. So I worked with some local vendors and had some funding from a family who wanted to create a memorial for a family member who had been lost. And so we created some space, but we really worked together as a community. So the students were involved from the very beginning, and this was the wish list we kept at the front desk. And the students were encouraged to just add the kinds of write down the things that they wanted to do in the space, as well as the things that they wanted to have us provide in that space. And so it was very informal at the beginning. So the students were involved in a lot of the decision making, including the colors of the laminate, the colors of the rug, the colors of the upholstery, and also the styles of the chairs. And I would actually winnow it down to a few options, and then the students would help me make the final decisions. This is what the reference area looked like before, very traditional reference. Note also the art is always there. And then what happened was I had the custodians help me retrofit those existing tables. We had round tables as well as square tables, and we just switched the tables. The round ones went in this area, and they built pedestals. And notice there's a little rectangular box here that housed the electronics within. And they were able to stain these pedestals the same color. And you can see the difference between the small tables and the tables we eventually wound up with, which were the large cafe style tables. And we purchased these cafe chairs, which were that were comfortable and rotated, and they were really popular. And then across one of the reference walls, we put a laminate that looked like a canoe. So we called it the canoe. It went 12 inches over the reference shelf that way and 12 inches over the reference shelf that way. And this became a place for art critique and small faculty meetings. And above is a flat screen TV that could be used over this little meeting space or pivoted so it could be used in the other presentation area. And the students helped me design this. It was really, really impressive. Here's a closer look at the monitor that swiveled. And of course, there was the need to have a lot of receptacles for power in there. And so students often came there and charged up. There are many attractive options for charging stations in the library that you'll probably want to investigate. You'll want to think about things like carpeting and soundproof walls and the various different benefits and drawbacks of vinyl versus tile versus vinyl tile versus rugs, all things that you're going to need to consider at some point. And also, as I mentioned, charging areas, lighting, climate control, running water, and here are some things to avoid. And these are my personal ideas and not necessarily gospel. I prefer not to have sunken story pits or circulation desks in the center of the library. I find, especially with younger children, that they do dive off these things, and if you are alone, these things are hard to manage. I prefer not to have a two-story facility. Again, there are issues with books being thrown and people misbehaving. And again, if you're limited on staff, these things may be hard to manage. And it's also for visibility. Sometimes you really can't keep an eye on what's going on upstairs. You want to avoid multiple entrances and exits, although you definitely need a fire exit. It's best to be able to have one space where people are coming in and going out. You want to think about whether or not you need study carols. Some students prefer it, but sometimes kids can hide in carols and do things that you may want to be able to observe. You want to, in general, be aware. Never build a place where you have unmanageable space. Things happen. If you don't have backs on shelves, the books fall through. So backs on shelves are important. You don't want your shelves to be too short or too tall. People don't bend to the bottom shelf. I generally don't shelve things on the bottom shelf for that reason, unless I have to. And you want to be considerate of the shorter children among the group as you think about taller shelves and, of course, age levels. You don't want to plan a space without storage, and you want to hold on to your storage because other people will want your storage, your closets. I have lost closets because administrators wanted them. You do want to have some workspace. We're processing fewer and fewer books, but it is good to have some workspace. You want definitely to be able to lock your front doors should there be an emergency, and also because you want not to have any theft and people are running around school buildings day and night. And I had trouble with my copy machine being completely emptied when parent groups were there and people just deciding they would make free copies. So you want to be accessible to the community, but you don't want to be exploited.
Ultimately, what we will really want to happen relating to our space is that we want people to be there. And to quote Ron Weasley, because that's what Hermione does, when in doubt, go to the library.